And now there are multiple ways for black to continue this game. Like black can continue with d5, targeting this bishop as well as this e4 pawn, and if e takes d5, knight takes d5, and after that knight at b goes to d2. And in the next move, knight to e4 is possible, which targets this bishop, as well as rook to e1 can also be playable, putting pressure over this e5 pawn, and yep, that's all. But after the move h3, yeah, here Niemann goes for d6, solidifying the position, and after that c3, preparing for b4. So to stop this, here Niemann goes for a5. And after that, d4 by Carlsen, and here capturing this might not be a good idea for black, because then after white recaptures, you can see white will be establishing a classic center which grants a space advantage to white. So that's why after seeing this, here Niemann also pushed his d pawn further. And now c takes d5 might be the better option, but Niemann might get worried about this bishop placement on this d5 square after this bishop takes d5. So that's why instead of recapturing, he brings his knight to f4. And now you can see he is creating excessive pressure on this d4 pawn by this knight, this queen and this bishop on a7. Okay, so now here white can continue this game by rook takes c6. This is because after knight takes d4 and instead of recapturing this knight here, white can slide this rook to d6, attacking this queen. And let's suppose if knight takes f3 check, queen takes f3, now comes a queen to c7 and queen to f5. And in the next move, you can see white can sacrifice this rook with the idea of knight to f6 check and after that queen to h7 mate. Okay, so in the actual game, after knight to e6, here Carlsen goes for b3, defending this b pawn and now black can capture this d4 pawn, but instead here Niemann goes for a4. And after that, here Niemann goes for rook at b goes to e8 with the idea of queen to b4, targeting this knight and this rook. Okay, so after that, rook to d7 and now for black it's better to bring this rook to e3 with the idea of doubling this rook and you can see black is doing great, but instead here Niemann made a mistake with bishop to b8 and that's a mistake because now you can see there is no more active there is no more active target for this bishop. And now Carlsen continues with pushing g3 with the idea of king to g2 in future. And after that, queen to e5, attacking this knight, and obviously white cannot go for rook to e1 because then black will push f5 and you can see white has to lose this knight. So that's why here the best move for white is to go for rook to d4 so that he can guard this knight. But instead here Carlsen made a mistake by knight to d6 and that's a mistake because now black get a chance to exchange this bad bishop with this good knight of white. And basically Niemann does exactly this. He exchanges the bishop with the knight and now for black it's better to go for queen to e2 or maybe queen to e4, trying to just exchange this queen and so that he can simplify the position. But instead he goes for rook to b8 and since black can anytime go for queen to a1 check, so that's why here Carlsen brings his king to g2. And now it might be better for black if he plays this rook on e4 permanently with the move f5. But he made a mistake by rook to b4, and that's a mistake because now Carlsen firstly exchanges the rook, and after that he brings this rook to d3, defending this b3 pawn as well as and you can see now white has this active king, as well as you can see white has an extra pawn on this b file. And now one thing is clear, that if black somehow trades all of these kingside pawn of whites, then you can see white cannot win this game with just the b pawn. And yeah, and you can see and basically the move f5 is an inaccuracy. Instead, he must consider bringing this king further into the game so that he can support these kingside pawns, so that he can exchange these pawns. And after that, here Carlsen brings his king to d2 with the idea of king to c3 so that he can attack this rook. And now rook to d4, and you can see in the next move, Carlsen is going to push this pawn. And now for black, it's better to push f4 so that he can attack this pawn chain, but instead he goes for g4, locking the position, which is obviously beneficial to white due to this b pawn. And you can see in the next move, black is threatening to capture this b4 pawn so that he can capture this rook after king takes b4. So that's why here Carlsen firstly slides his rook to f4, which is really a beautiful move, which first of all guards this f2 pawn if a danger somehow infiltrate towards the white king side. Secondly, this rook is also targeting this f5 pawn, so by this you can see black king cannot have many squares left. And thirdly, you can see it also keeps the black king cut off. And now here Niemann gives a check. And in this position, Hans Niemann resigned. This is because let's suppose if this game continues like rook to c2 check, king to b5, and if he tries to give another check, simply rook to b4, and after this you can see now there is nothing black can do to save this game. And yeah, this b pawn as well as this b pawn from promotion. Like this video and I will see you in the next one. This is your host Bison signing off. Bye bye.